Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. The job at the Family Dollar on the edge of town was supposed to be a temporary lifeline, a way to make rent while I figured out my next move after dropping out of college. It was a typical store for the chain, perpetually understaffed, with fluorescent lights that hummed with a special kind of misery and shelves overflowing with the chaotic jumble of off-brand goods. My shift was the one nobody wanted, the overnight stocking shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., alone in the silent, locked store. For the first few weeks, the solitude was a blessing. I'd put in my earbuds, listen to podcasts, and methodically break down pallets of toilet paper and canned goods. The silence of the store was my companion. The store itself was old, a repurposed grocery store from the 70s. It had a strange layout, with a large, cavernous back stockroom filled with towering metal shelves that created a maze of dark, narrow aisles. It was back there, in the echoing silence of the stockroom, that I first noticed him. I didn't see him, not at first. I would just get this feeling, a sudden, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind that tells you you're being watched. I'd whip my head around, expecting to see my manager, Dave, who sometimes forgot things and came back. But there was never anyone there, just the towering shelves and the deep, oppressive shadows they cast. Then I started noticing things out of place. I'm a neat freak, even when stocking shelves. I keep my box cutter, tape gun, and water bottle in a specific arrangement on the cart I use. I came back from the bathroom one night to find my box cutter moved to the other side of the cart. The next night, a case of canned peas I had just stacked was moved from one shelf to another. It was subtle, gaslighting level stuff. I started to think the long, lonely hours were getting to me. The first time I heard him, I was in aisle 3, stocking laundry detergent. The store was dead silent except for the hum of the freezers. Then, from the back of the store, I heard a soft, dragging sound. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound, like someone dragging a loaded pallet jack with a broken wheel. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. "Dave," I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous space. The dragging stopped. Silence. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from my cart and walked cautiously towards the back of the store, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. I swept the beam of the flashlight through the main aisles, down the toy aisle with its rows of dead-eyed dolls, past the seasonal aisle still inexplicably filled with expired Easter candy in July. Nothing. I pushed through the swinging doors into the stockroom. The air was colder back there. I called out again. "Is anyone here?" Only the echo answered. I walked the maze of shelves, my light cutting through the thick darkness. The stockroom was empty, but the pallet jack I had left in the main aisle was now sitting in the far corner of the stockroom, one of its wheels jammed sideways. It couldn't have moved on its own. The activity escalated after that night. I would hear soft whistling coming from aisles I had just left. I'd catch fleeting glimpses of movement in the polished reflection of the freezer doors. One night, the store's tinny overhead music system, which was always shut off during my shift, crackled to life and played a single, distorted, old-timey waltz for about a minute before falling silent again. I was genuinely starting to lose my mind. I told Dave about it, but he just laughed it off. "It's an old building, man," he said. "Probably rats the size of cats back there." But rats don't move pallet jacks or whistle show tunes. The breaking point came during a particularly grueling shift. A massive truck had come in, and the stockroom was overflowing with pallets. I was in the very back, in the darkest part of the maze, cutting open boxes of cheap plastic toys. I had my headphones in, trying to drown out the oppressive silence. I turned to grab a new box, and he was there. Standing at the end of the aisle, about 20 feet away, was the figure of a man. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in an old, faded blue work shirt. kind the store used as a uniform a decade ago. His face was in shadow, but I could see that his head was tilted at a strange, unnatural angle, as if his neck were broken. He was perfectly still, just watching me. I ripped my earbuds out, my entire body frozen in a state of pure, primal terror. We just stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at each other down the narrow aisle of cheap toys. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He was just a silent, terrifying fixture in the shadows. I finally found my voice. Pathetic, strangled whimper. The sound seemed to break the spell. He turned, not like a person, but like an object pivoting, and walked away, disappearing behind a towering shelf of paper towels. The strange thing was, he didn't make a sound. No footsteps. He just vanished. I ran. I didn't even clock out. I just fled the store, bursting out the back fire exit and running all the way home. I called Dave from my apartment, babbling incoherently that I quit. A few days later, after I had calmed down, I did some digging. I found an old article from a local paper online. 10 years ago, an overnight stalker at that same Family Dollar had been killed in a tragic accident. A forklift driver had accidentally backed into one of the massive shelving units in the stockroom, causing it to collapse. The stalker, a man named Frank, had been crushed to death. The article mentioned he was found with his head at a grotesquely unnatural angle. His picture was in the article. It was the man I had seen, the man in the old blue work shirt. He wasn't haunting the store. He was just working. He was a permanent part of the inventory, the night stalker who never clocked out. And for one terrifying month, I had been his shift partner. My daughter, Lily, was obsessed with dolls. At 7 years old, her world revolved around them. So, a trip to the Family Dollar was always a negotiation. I'd be there for cheap cleaning supplies, and she'd make a beeline for aisle 7, the toy aisle, a chaotic explosion of plastic and brightly colored cardboard. This particular Family Dollar, located in a rundown strip mall, was grimmer than most. The lights flickered, half the shelves were empty, and the air had a permanent scent of stale popcorn and dust. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Lily found a doll she had to have. It was stuffed in the back of a wire shelf, behind a row of garish superhero knockoffs. It was an odd doll, clearly not part of the store's usual stock. It looked old, like something from the 1960s. It was a simple porcelain doll with wide, painted blue eyes, rosy cheeks, and fine, blonde hair. It was wearing a faded, handmade-looking blue dress. There was no box, no price tag. "Can I have her, Mommy? Please," Lily begged, clutching the doll to her chest. I was hesitant. It was dirty and looked like something someone had left behind. But the cashier, a bored-looking teenager named Kayla, just shrugged when I brought it to the counter. "I don't know, $5, she said, not even looking up from her phone. I paid the $5, and Lily skipped out of the store, ecstatic with her new treasure, which she immediately named Daisy. That night, the strange things began. I put Lily to bed, tucking her in with her menagerie of stuffed animals and her new doll, Daisy, which she placed on the pillow beside her. Around midnight, I was woken up by a sound from my own bedroom closet, a soft, scraping sound. I got up, my heart pounding, and cautiously opened the closet door. Nothing, just my clothes and shoes. I chalked it up to the old house settling. As I was about to get back into bed, I noticed something on my dresser. It was the doll Daisy, sitting upright, her painted blue eyes staring directly at me. I froze. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had left that doll in Lily's room. I must have moved it in my sleep, I told myself, a desperate attempt at a rational explanation. I picked up the doll. It felt cold, unnaturally so. I carried it back to Lily's room and placed it on her toy chest, as far from her bed as possible. Lily was fast asleep. The next morning, I woke up to find the doll sitting on my nightstand, inches from my face. Its head was tilted slightly, and its painted smile seemed wider, more menacing. I didn't scream. I was too terrified. I grabbed the doll, marched downstairs, and threw it in the outside garbage can, burying it under a bag of coffee grounds and eggshells. When I picked Lily up from school that day, she was distraught. "Mommy, where's Daisy? I can't find her anywhere," she cried. I told her the doll was probably lost, that we would get her a new one. This led to a full-blown tantrum, but I stood my ground. The doll was gone. That night, I was woken by the sound of giggling coming from Lily's room. It was a high-pitched, childish giggle, but it wasn't Lily's. It was colder, thinner. I crept to her bedroom door and listened. I could hear Lily talking in her sleep, murmuring to someone. "Okay, Daisy," she whispered. "I'll be quiet. Don't tell Mommy." My blood ran cold. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, except for the moonlight streaming through the window. Lily was asleep in her bed, and sitting on the pillow next to her, its porcelain face glowing in the moonlight, was the doll. Daisy was back. I completely lost it. I snatched the doll from the bed. It felt different this time, heavier, and a palpable sense of malevolence radiated from it. Lily stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake. I took the doll to the garage, grabbed a hammer, and smashed it to pieces on the concrete floor. The porcelain shattered with a sickening crack, like breaking bone. I swept the shards into a box, drove to a dumpster behind a grocery store miles away, and threw it in. When I got home, I found Lily in the living room, standing in front of the TV, which was off. She was staring at her own reflection in the dark screen, her back to me. "Lily, honey, what are you doing up?" I asked. She turned around slowly. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide and dark. A slow, cold smile spread across her face, a smile that was not her own, in a voice that was a chilling imitation of the doll's imaginary one. A high, thin, porcelain voice. She said, "You can't get rid of me that easily." The entity wasn't in the doll. The doll was just a vessel, a key. The trip to that dusty, grim Family Dollar hadn't been about buying a toy. It had been an invitation, and something had followed us home. The doll was gone, but its spirit had found a new, more perfect toy to play with. My daughter. Working retail, you get used to the strange rhythms of returns. People bring back the most bizarre things for the most nonsensical reasons. At the Family Dollar where I worked as an assistant manager, we had a large, blue plastic bin behind the customer service counter where we tossed the returned items that needed to be processed and put back on the shelves. We called it the limbo bin. Most of the stuff in there was mundane. A t-shirt that didn't fit, a bag of stale chips, a leaky bottle of shampoo. But every now and then, something weird would show up. It started with a mirror. A customer, a frantic-looking woman, returned a small, cheap, plastic-framed wall mirror. Her reason for return was listed on the slip as defective. When I asked her what was wrong with it, she just shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "It shows things that aren't there," she whispered, before practically running out of the store. I shrugged and tossed the mirror into the return bin. It was probably just warped, creating strange reflections. But later that day, as I was walking past the bin, I glanced into the mirror. For a split second, I saw a face looking back at me that wasn't mine. It was a man's face, pale and gaunt, with hollow, empty eye sockets. I blinked, and it was gone. My own startled reflection staring back. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the image lingered in my mind. A few days later, a man returned a set of wind chimes. His reason: they make noise when there's no wind. Again, I tossed them into the limbo bin on top of the mirror. That night, after we had locked up and the store was silent, I was in the back office doing paperwork. I heard a faint, delicate chiming sound coming from the front of the store. I went out to the sales floor. The air was perfectly still, but the wind chimes in the return bin were swaying and tinkling softly, as if stirred by an invisible breeze. More strange items began to accumulate in the bin. A radio that would turn itself on and play static. A child's toy phone that would ring even with the batteries removed. A snow globe that, instead of white snow, seemed to have black, ash-like flakes swirling inside it. Each item was returned by a different, unnerved customer with a vague, fearful explanation. The bin was becoming a collection of cursed objects, a vortex of low-budget paranormal activity. I became obsessed with the bin. I started documenting the items, taking pictures, writing down the stories. My coworkers thought I was crazy. They'd laugh and say it was just a pile of junk, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear the whispers that sometimes seemed to emanate from the bin when the store was quiet. They didn't feel the palpable cold spot that now surrounded the customer service counter. The real terror began when items started returning on their own. One morning, I came in to open the store and found the defective mirror, which I had processed and put back on the shelf the day before, sitting right on top of the pile in the return bin. I checked the security footage. No one had come near the bin all night. The mirror had simply reappeared. The same thing happened with the wind chimes, the radio, toy phone. No matter how many times I put them back on the sales floor, by the next morning, they would be back in the bin, as if drawn there by an unseen force. They belonged to the bin now. It was their home. I started to have nightmares about the bin. I dreamed that I was trapped inside it, surrounded by the broken, haunted objects, their ghostly owners staring down at me with empty eyes. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sound of wind chimes and static ringing in my ears. I tried to get rid of the items. I told my manager, who was completely unsympathetic, that we should just damage them out and throw them away. He refused, citing company policy. If it's sellable, it goes back on the floor, he'd bark. So my days became a bizarre, Sisyphean struggle, putting the haunted items back on the shelves, only to find them back in their limbo bin the next day. The final straw was the mannequin hand. It was one of those cheap, plastic display hands for holding jewelry. A woman returned it, saying she bought it for her daughter's art project, but that it kept moving. She said she'd find it in different positions, its fingers curled into a fist or pointing at her. I, of course, tossed it into the bin. That night, I was closing the store alone. I was counting the cash in the register when I heard a soft, scraping sound from behind me. I turned around. The mannequin hand was slowly, deliberately, pulling itself out of the bin, its plastic fingers gripping the edge. It flopped onto the counter, then started to crawl towards me, inch by inch, like a grotesque, dismembered spider. I screamed and backed away, knocking over a display of cheap perfume bottles. The hand stopped, its index finger slowly uncurling to point directly at me, and from the bin, a chorus of whispers rose up, a cacophony of disembodied voices, all saying the same thing. "You're one of us now. You're defective." I fled. I left the money on the counter. The door unlocked, and I ran. I never went back. I don't know what happened to that store or its cursed return bin, but sometimes I wonder if the bin is still there, collecting its broken, haunted treasures. And I wonder who will be the next defective item to be returned. The Family Dollar on 36th and Vine smelled weird. It wasn't the usual retail smell of plastic and cardboard. Underneath that, there was another scent, a cloyingly sweet, floral smell. The smell of lilacs. It was strongest in aisle 4, the health and beauty aisle. It was so overpowering that it gave me a headache whenever I had to stock the shelves there. I was working there part-time to save up for a car. It was a dead-end job in a dead-end part of the city. But the manager, a tired woman named Brenda, was nice enough. I asked her about the smell once. Her face went pale. "We've had plumbers check, exterminators, everything," she said, her voice low. "They can't find the source. We just try to ignore it." The regulars, the people who lived in the neighborhood, called it the ghost smell. They said it came and went, but it was always strongest in the spring. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the store was empty except for me, Brenda, and a single, elderly customer, a woman named Mrs. Peterson. She was shuffling down aisle 4, her cart rattling. I was at the front of the store, wiping down the counters. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash, followed by a gasp. I ran to aisle 4. Mrs. Peterson was standing there, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. A display of shampoo bottles had been knocked to the floor. "Are you okay?" I asked. She didn't look at me. She was staring at a spot on the floor just past the spill. She pushed it," Mrs. Peterson whispered, her whole body trembling. "The girl, The girl in the yellow dress. She just ran right past me. I looked. There was no one there. The aisle was empty except for the two of us. "There's no one here, Mrs. Peterson," I said gently. "Don't you smell it?" she cried, her voice rising with hysteria. "The lilacs. She always smells like lilacs." Brenda came rushing over and helped me calm the old woman down, eventually helping her out of the store. "Don't pay her any mind," Brenda said, though her own hands were shaking. "She gets confused sometimes." But I could tell Brenda was spooked. The lilac smell in the aisle was suddenly so strong it was making me nauseous. That night, I was tasked with mopping the floors after we closed. Brenda had already left, and I was alone in the silent store. I started in the back and worked my way forward. When I got to aisle 4, the lilac scent was overwhelming. The air was thick and heavy with it. As I was mopping up the last of the spilled shampoo, I saw them. A set of wet footprints on the linoleum floor I had just cleaned. They were small, like a child's, and they were bare. They started in the middle of the aisle, from nowhere, and led towards the back wall, where they simply stopped. I followed them, my heart pounding. At the spot where the footprints ended, I noticed something on the wall, behind a shelf of hairspray. It was a small, dark stain, almost hidden from view. I pushed the shelf aside. The stain was a handprint. A small, perfect, child's handprint burned into the drywall. The next day, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I asked Brenda about it. She sighed a deep, weary sound. She told me the story. Years ago, before the store was a Family Dollar, it had been a laundromat. A fire had broken out. A terrible, fast-moving fire. A mother and her little girl had been trapped inside. The mother had managed to get out, but her daughter, a 7-year-old girl named Sarah, had perished in the blaze. They found her body in the back of the building, right where aisle 4 was now. She had been wearing a yellow dress, and in the yard of their home, which had also burned down, there had been a massive lilac bush, her favorite flower. The ghost wasn't just a smell. It was the spirit of a lost little girl, trapped in the place where she died, forever playing in the aisles, running from a fire that only she could see. The lilac scent was her signature, the only piece of her home she had left. The sightings became more frequent after that. I would catch glimpses of a flash of yellow out of the corner of my eye. I would find small items, like candy bars or hair clips, moved from one shelf to another. One night, I heard the faint sound of a little girl crying, coming from the back of the store. The final, terrifying event happened a week before I quit. I was closing up alone again. I had just locked the front door when all the lights in the store went out, plunging me into darkness. My first thought was that a fuse had blown. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. As I turned on the light, I heard a sound from aisle 4, the sound of running footsteps and a child's terrified scream. "Mommy, help me." I shone my phone's light down the aisle. At the far end, standing against the back wall, was the translucent figure of a little girl in a yellow dress. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes wide with terror, and all around her, the air was shimmering with a heat that wasn't there, and the distinct, acrid smell of smoke was overpowering the sweet scent of lilacs. Flames, visible only to her, were licking at the walls. She was reliving her final moments. She put her hand up against the wall, right where the burned handprint was, and she screamed again, a sound of pure, heart-wrenching agony. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the vision was over. The lights flickered back on. The figure was gone. The smell of smoke vanished, replaced once again by the cloying, sweet scent of lilacs. I didn't even go back for my purse. I unlocked the door and ran. I never set foot in that Family Dollar again. Some ghosts are angry. Some are sad. But the ghost of the little girl in the yellow dress was the most terrifying of all. She was just lost, forever trapped in an aisle of cheap shampoo, forever smelling of flowers and smoke. The Family Dollar on the corner of 8th and Main had a problem with shoplifters. It was a constant battle. To combat this, corporate had installed a new, state-of-the-art security system. Not just cameras, but a series of large, convex security mirrors placed strategically in the corners of the ceiling. giving a panoramic, fisheye view of the aisles. As the newly promoted key holder, it was my job to watch the cameras and keep an eye on those mirrors. Most of the time, it was boring work. I'd watch teenagers try to stuff candy bars in their pockets or old ladies swap price tags. But one evening, as I was scanning the store from the small, cramped office in the back, I saw something in one of the mirrors that made my blood run cold. I was watching the mirror that covered the back corner of the store, near the pet food and the paper goods. I saw a man turn to the aisle. He was an ordinary-looking man, middle-aged, wearing a gray trench coat. Even though it was a warm evening, he was browsing the shelves, picking up items and putting them back. But there was something wrong. As he walked down the aisle, he passed a section of shelving that was made of polished chrome, highly reflective. I could see the reflection of the shelves, the products, the aisle itself, but I couldn't see his reflection. He cast no image on the gleaming metal. I blinked, leaning closer to the monitor. It had to be a trick of the light, a strange angle. I switched to the actual camera feed for that aisle. The man was there, clear as day, walking towards the camera. I switched back to the feed from the security mirror. He was there in the mirror's view, but he still had no reflection in the chrome shelving. He was a blank spot, a void in the reflected world. My heart started to pound. I watched him as he moved through the store, my eyes darting between the different camera feeds and the views from the security mirrors. Every time he passed a reflective surface, the glass on the freezer doors, a shiny floor sign, even a puddle of spilled soda on the floor, he left no reflection. It was as if the laws of physics didn't apply to him. He wasn't stealing anything. He was just browse. He made his way through the entire store, aisle by aisle, his movements calm and deliberate. The few other customers in the store didn't seem to notice him, walking past him without a second glance. It was as if he was invisible to them. Only I, through the electronic and mirrored eyes of the security system, could see him, and I could see what he wasn't. He finally made his way to the front of the store. He didn't have any items. He just walked towards the automatic doors. I held my breath, watching the main camera feed. He walked right up to the doors. They didn't open. He just stood there, facing the glass, for a long, silent moment. I could see the reflection of the store behind him in the glass door, the registers, the candy racks, but there was no reflection of the man in the gray trench coat. Then, he did something that terrified me more than anything else. He slowly turned his head and looked directly up the security camera above the door. It felt like he was looking right at me, through the lens, through the monitor, into the back office. He smiled a wide, thin-lipped smile that was devoid of any warmth or humanity. And then he just walked through the closed glass door. He didn't break it. He passed through it like a ghost and was gone. I sat there in the office, shaking, for a long time. I reviewed the security footage over and over again. It was all there. The man with no reflection. The smile. The impossible exit. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? I quit that job a week later. I couldn't stand being in that store, under the watchful, mirrored eyes of the security system. I couldn't shake the feeling that the system hadn't been installed to watch the shoplifters. It had been installed to watch for him. Sometimes I wonder what he was. A ghost, a demon, something else entirely. And I wonder what he was shopping for in that dingy Family Dollar. I have a terrifying suspicion that he wasn't looking for a bargain. He was looking for a reflection, and he was hoping to find one in me. My job at the Family Dollar was far from glamorous. My primary duty, besides running the register, was to manage the fresh food section. This consisted of a single, sad-looking refrigerated case near the back of the store, filled with packages of off-brand hot dogs, suspicious-looking lunch meat, and dairy products that were always perilously close to their expiration dates. My manager, a man named Carl who was perpetually stressed, had one unbreakable rule: never let anything go past its date. If it's about to expire, mark it down. If it's expired, damage it out. I don't want a lawsuit. So, every morning, my first task was to check the dates. One Monday, I found a package of bologna that had expired the day before. Following procedure, I took it to the back room to scan it into the damaged goods system before throwing it out. The back room was a cluttered, windowless space that always smelled faintly of dust and despair. I scanned the barcode, the system beeped, and I tossed the package into the large, green dumpster we kept for unsellable items. Job done. The next morning, I was checking the dates again. Tucked in the back of the cooler, behind a carton of sour cream, was the same package of expired bologna. I recognized it by a small tear in the corner of the plastic. I was confused. I knew I had thrown it out. I figured another employee, maybe the lazy teenager who worked afternoons, had found it in the dumpster and, not wanting to do the paperwork, had just tossed it back in the cooler. Annoyed, I took the package to the back, scanned it out again, and this time, I took a black marker and drew a large X across the front before throwing it deep into the dumpster. The next day, it was back. The same package of expired bologna, with the tear in the corner and the large black X on the front, sitting in the refrigerated case as if it had never left. My annoyance was turning to a cold, creeping fear. This wasn't a prank. The store had been locked all night. I was the one who opened it in the morning. No one could have put it back. I took the package to Carl. "This keeps reappearing," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've thrown it out twice." Carl looked at the package, then at me. He was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy. "Look," he said, sighing, "just get rid of it. Take it out to the main dumpster behind the building. Make sure it's gone." Following his orders, I took the bologna out the back door to the large, metal dumpster in the alley. I threw it in, hearing it land with a soft thud. I even lingered for a few minutes, just to make sure it didn't somehow climb back out. The next morning, I went to the refrigerated case with a sense of profound dread. I looked in the back. It was there. The package of expired bologna, with the tear and the X, was sitting on the shelf, a fine layer of condensation on the plastic. It was cold, as if it had been in the cooler all night. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I was trapped in a bizarre, surreal loop with a package of haunted lunch meat. I decided to take a more drastic measure. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I took the package of bologna. I drove to a park a few miles away, dug a hole under a large oak tree, and buried it. I felt insane, performing a funeral for a packet of expired meat, but I had to be sure it was gone for good. I returned to work, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in days. The curse was broken. That night, I had a dream. I was in the store, but it was dark and empty. I was standing in front of the refrigerated case. The door creaked open on its own. A man was inside, curled up on the shelves where the meat should be. He was pale and gaunt, his skin a sickly, gray color. He was wearing an old Family Dollar uniform. He looked up at me with sad, empty eyes and whispered, "You took my lunch." I woke up in a cold sweat. The dream had felt terrifyingly real. When I got to work the next morning, Carl was waiting for me, his face grim. "There was a situation last night," he said. "The security company called. The motion sensors in the store kept going off all night. They sent a patrol, but they couldn't find anyone." He led me to the back of the store, to the refrigerated case. The glass door was covered in condensation, but on the inside, someone had traced a message in the fog. 2 words, "Give it back." And on the shelf inside, where the bologna used to be, sat a single, withered, gray hand. I didn't even say goodbye. I walked out of that store and never returned. I later found out from another employee that the store had been built on the site of an old pauper cemetery that had been relocated in the 60s. Apparently, they had missed one. A man named Henry, who had died of malnutrition during the Depression. The only thing he had been buried with was his last meal, a single bologna sandwich. And for some reason, my store's cheap. Off-brand bologna was the closest thing he could find to what he had lost. He wasn't haunting the store. He was just hungry. Every retail store is one, a dusty box under the counter filled with the sad, forgotten detritus of customers' lives. At the Family Dollar where I work weekends, ours was a cardboard box that once held Christmas tinsel. It was filled with the usual stuff: a single glove, a pair of cheap sunglasses, a child's worn-out teddy bear. It was my job to go through it once a month and toss anything that hadn't been claimed. One Saturday, as I was sorting through the box, I found something new at the bottom. It was an old leather-bound diary, small enough to fit in a pocket. It had no name on it. The clasp was broken, and the pages were yellowed and brittle. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The handwriting was a spidery, elegant cursive, clearly from a much older era. The entries were dated from the fall of 1958. It was the diary of a young woman named Eleanor. Her entries were filled with the mundane details of her life, her job as a secretary, her new boyfriend, her hopes and dreams. But as I read on, the tone began to change. Eleanor wrote about her boyfriend, a man named Thomas, with a growing sense of fear. He was becoming possessive, jealous, controlling. He would wait for her after work, his presence a constant, looming shadow. October 12th, 1958. Thomas was waiting for me again after work. He doesn't like my new dress. He said it was indecent. Sometimes, the way he looks at me, it's like he's not seeing me, but something he wants to own. The diary entries grew more frantic. Eleanor wrote about wanting to leave him, but being too afraid. He had threatened her. He told her that if he couldn't have her, no one could. The final entry was dated November 3rd, 1958. It was short and chilling. Thomas knows I am leaving. He is coming for me tonight. I am going to the old general store on the corner to call my sister. I hope she comes for me. I am so afraid. I am hiding this diary. If anyone finds it, know that he did it. My blood ran cold. The old general store on the corner. That was this building. Before it was a Family Dollar. It had been a general store for over 100 years. I felt a sudden, intense chill, as if someone had opened a freezer door right next to me. I looked up from the diary. The store was quiet. I was alone at the front counter. I tried to dismiss it, but the story in the diary felt intensely real, a ghost in my hands. I placed the diary back in the lost and found box, my hands shaking. Later that evening, just before closing, a man came into the store. He was elderly, with a stooped back and watery, pale blue eyes. He walked with a strange, shuffling gait. He browsed the aisles for a long time, not really looking at anything, just pacing. He finally came up to the counter. "Can I help you?" I asked. He leaned in close, his voice a dry, reedy whisper. "I'm looking for something I lost," he said, "a long time ago. What did you lose?" I asked, my hand hovering over the lost and found box. He smiled a strange, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A girl," he whispered. Her name was Eleanor. I froze, my heart seizing in my chest. I stared at him, at his old, wrinkled face, and I knew. It was him. It was Thomas. He seemed to read the recognition in my eyes. His smile widened. "I see you found my property," he said, his gaze flicking down to the lost and found box. She was a foolish girl, tried to run away from me, but I found her. I always find what's mine. He leaned further over the counter, his strength surprising for a man his age. "Give it to me," he hissed, his voice suddenly filled with a cold, terrifying menace. "Give me back my diary." The diary wasn't Eleanor's. It was his. He had taken it from her that night, a trophy of his crime. He had lost it here, in this very building, all those years ago, and now he had come back for it. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. Then, the lights in the store flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. A woman's voice, soft and sad, whispered from the shadows behind me, "Don't give it to him." The air grew intensely cold. A faint, shimmering light began to glow from the lost and found box. Thomas recoiled, his face contorted in a mask of rage and fear. "Eleanor," he spat. The ghost of Eleanor was still here, tied to the place where she had died, and to the diary that held her final words. She was protecting me. The front doors of the store, which were locked, burst open with a gust of wind. "Get out," Eleanor's voice whispered, a current of cold air pushing at my back. I didn't hesitate. I ran. As I fled, I looked back and saw the faint, shimmering figure of a young woman in an old-fashioned dress, standing between the old man and the counter. He was screaming, a sound of pure terror, as her ghostly form enveloped him. I never found out what happened to him. I never went back to that store. But I know that the lost and found box at the Family Dollar on the corner holds more than just forgotten gloves and sunglasses. It holds the final testimony of a murdered girl and the tormented spirit of the man who killed her, forever bound to the evidence of his crime. The Family Dollar where I worked had a design flaw. The emergency exit at the back of the stockroom opened into a narrow, dark alley that was a magnet for trouble. The door was supposed to be for emergencies only, armed with the shrieking alarm. But the alarm was broken, and had been for years. The door was secured by a heavy-duty deadbolt. We were always paranoid about it. My job was to close the store, which meant I was often there late at night, alone, doing the final cleanup and paperwork. The stockroom was the worst part. It was a vast, poorly lit space, and the silence back there felt heavy. One night, as I was sweeping the stockroom floor, I heard a sound that made me freeze. A single, soft knock on the emergency exit door. Knock. I stood perfectly still, listening. The alley behind the store was supposed to be empty at this hour. It was probably just a junkie or a homeless person, I told myself. I ignored it. A minute later, it came again, louder this time. Knock. Knock. We're closed. I yelled at the door, my voice sounding much braver than I felt. The knocking stopped, but it was replaced by a new sound. A soft, scratching sound, like a dog pawing at the door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A shiver of fear went down my spine. I crept closer to the door and looked through the small, grimy, wire-reinforced window. I couldn't see anything but the dark, slick brick of the building opposite. The scratching stopped. Then a voice, a man's voice, low and calm, spoke from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there," he said. "I can smell you." That was it. I backed away from the door slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I fumbled for my phone and called the police. I whispered my location and the situation to the dispatcher, who told me to stay on the line and get to a safe place. As I was on the phone, the handle on the deadbolt began to turn, slowly, deliberately. Click, click, click. He was picking the lock. I ran from the stockroom, slamming the swinging doors behind me, and locked myself in the small, windowless manager's office. I huddled under the desk, listening to the dispatcher's voice on the phone and the sounds from the back of the store. I heard the heavy thud of the emergency exit door swinging open. Then footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps, walking through the stockroom. He was inside. He was quiet for a long time. I imagined him moving through the dark aisles of the stockroom, a predator in the shadows. Then I heard him in the store itself, the soft squeak of his shoes on the linoleum floor. He was walking the aisles. I could hear the faint rustle of plastic bags, the clink of glass bottles as he brushed past the shelves. He was in no hurry. He was exploring. He was hunting. "The officers are 2 minutes out," the dispatcher whispered in my ear. It felt like a lifetime. The footsteps stopped right outside the office door. I held my breath, my entire body trembling. The doorknob began to jiggle. He was testing it, finding it locked. He didn't try to pick it. He just knocked. A soft, polite, terrifying knock. "I know where you are," he said, his voice calm and conversational, as if he were commenting on the weather. "This is a fun game, but it's almost over." He started to whistle, a cheerful, carefree tune that was utterly incongruous with the terror of the situation. He walked away from the door, his whistling echoing through the empty store. I could hear him opening things, rummaging. I heard the beep of the microwave in the break room, followed by the smell of burnt popcorn. He was making himself at home. Then I heard the sirens, faint at first, then growing louder. The whistling stopped. The front glass doors of the store shattered as the police made a forced entry. I heard shouting, commands, the sound of a scuffle. A few minutes later, a police officer knocked on the office door. "Ma'am, it's the police. You can come out. He's in custody." I stumbled out of the office. The store was a wreck. Displays were knocked over. Merchandise was strewn everywhere. They had the man in handcuffs near the front. He was a small, wiry man with wild, frantic eyes. As they led him past me, he looked at me and smiled, a terrible, knowing smile. "Next time," he whispered. They told me later he was a known transient, a dangerous man with a long history of violent assaults. He had been living in the woods behind the store. They found his camp, a small shelter made of tarps and branches, and inside it they found things. Dozens of driver's licenses, all belonging to women, and photographs, candid photographs of women going about their daily lives, and a new set of photos, pictures of me, taken through the windows of the store while I worked, pictures of my car in the parking lot. He hadn't just found the store that night. He had been watching me. He had been waiting. The broken lock on the emergency exit wasn't a flaw in the building. It was an invitation he had been planning to accept for a very long time. The Family Dollar I managed in a forgotten corner of Ohio still had an old layaway program. It was an ancient system, mostly used by our elderly customers for Christmas presents. The layaway items were kept in the cage, a large, chain-link enclosure that took up a significant portion of our already cramped stockroom. It was secured with a heavy padlock, and only I had the key. The cage was filled with a sad assortment of items, board games, cheap electronics, and a lot of toys. In the back corner of the cage, there was one item that had been there for years. It was a vintage rocking horse, the kind made of solid wood with a yarn tail and leather saddle. Its painted eyes were chipped, giving it a perpetually surprised expression. According to the paperwork, it had been put on layaway 5 years ago by a woman who had made one payment and then disappeared. Company policy dictated we hold layaway items for a year, but the previous manager had never had the heart to get rid of the horse, so it stayed, a silent resident of the layaway cage. I'd always hated the horse. There was something deeply unsettling about it. Sometimes, when I was in the stockroom alone at night, I could have sworn I saw it rocking, ever so slightly, out of the corner of my eye. I always dismissed it as a trick of the light. One night, I was closing up the store. It was late, and a heavy thunderstorm was raging outside. The power had been flickering, and the store was lit by the occasional flash of lightning and the emergency backup lights. I was in the back office, cashing out the register, when I heard a sound from the stockroom, a slow, rhythmic creaking. Creak, creak, creak. It was the sound of the rocking horse. My first thought was that a draft had gotten into the stockroom, but the sound was too steady, too deliberate. I grabbed my mag light and pushed open the office door. The stockroom was dark and cavernous, the metal shelves looking like skeletal ribs in the gloom. The creaking was louder now. I walked cautiously towards the layaway cage, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The creaking stopped. I shone the light on the rocking horse. It was perfectly still. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, telling myself I was just spooked by the storm. As I turned to leave, I heard a child's giggle. It was a soft, faint sound, and it came from inside the locked cage. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I swept the flashlight beam around the inside of the cage. It was empty, except for the stacks of layaway items and the rocking horse. Is anyone there? I whispered, my voice trembling. The only answer was the creaking, starting up again, faster this time. Creak, 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 creak. I backed away from the cage, my mind reeling. I was about to flee the stockroom when a flash of lightning illuminated the entire space. And in that split second of brilliant light, I saw him. A small boy, no older than 5 or 6, was sitting on the rocking horse, his translucent form glowing with a faint, ethereal light. He was wearing old-fashioned overalls and had a mop of unruly blonde hair. He was rocking back and forth furiously, a wide, joyful grin on his face. The lightning faded, plunging the room back into darkness. The creaking stopped. I ran. I locked the office, grabbed my things, and fled the store, not even bothering to set the main alarm. I sat in my car in the rain-swept parking lot, trying to process what I had seen. The next day, I came to work armed with a new resolve. I was getting rid of that horse. I found the old layaway slip for it. The name on the slip was Marianne Weller. The date was from 5 years prior. On a whim, I Googled the name. The search results hit me like a punch to the gut. A series of news articles from 5 years ago. Marianne Weller and her 5-year-old son, Toby, had been killed in a car accident during a bad thunderstorm. Their car had skidded off the road and hit a tree. The accident had happened the same day she had put the rocking horse on layaway. It was meant to be his birthday present. Toby's ghost wasn't haunting the store. He was just waiting for his mother to come back and pick up his present. He was trapped in the layaway cage, forever playing on the rocking horse she had promised him. That evening, after the store closed, I unlocked the layaway cage. I felt a strange sense of reverence, of sadness. I slowly wheeled the old rocking horse out of the cage and through the dark, silent store. As I pushed it through the front doors, I felt a sudden gust of cold air and the faint, sweet scent of rain-soaked earth. I heard a child's happy sigh, a whisper on the wind that said, "Thank you." I left the rocking horse on the sidewalk in front of the store. I didn't care what happened to it. I just knew it couldn't stay in the cage any longer. The next morning, the horse was gone. The stockroom felt different, lighter. The oppressive, watchful feeling was gone. I never saw the ghost of Toby again. But sometimes, on stormy nights, when I'm closing up the store alone, I think I can hear the faint, distant sound of a rocking horse and the happy laughter of a little boy who finally got to take his present home. The handheld price scanners at our Family Dollar were notoriously finicky. They were old, bulky, and the batteries were always dying. But they were a necessary evil for price checks and inventory. One of my nightly closing duties was to take the scanner and do a spot check of a different aisle each night, ensuring the prices on the shelves matched the prices in the system. It was a mundane, boring task, until the night the scanner started talking back. I was in aisle 2, the food aisle, scanning cans of off-brand soup. I scanned a can of chicken noodle. The screen flashed the price, $1.25. But through the device's tinny speaker, instead of the usual cheerful beep, a voice whispered, "Help me." I dropped the scanner. It clattered to the floor. I stared at it, my heart hammering. The voice was a dry, electronic whisper, like a primitive speech synthesizer, but it was unmistakably a voice. I picked up the scanner, my hand shaking. I must have imagined it. It was late. I was tired. I aimed it at another can, this time tomato soup. I squeezed the trigger. The screen flashed, $1.25. The speaker crackled, and the same electronic voice whispered, "It's cold." I wasn't imagining it. The scanner was possessed. I tried another item, a box of crackers. "So dark," it whispered. Every item I scanned in that aisle produced another whispered, two-word phrase of terror. "Can't move." So alone. Where am I? I felt a wave of nausea. I turned the scanner off, pulled the battery out, and put it back in its charging cradle in the office. I didn't tell anyone. They'd think I was crazy. The next night, I avoided aisle 2. I decided to do my spot check in aisle 9, the cleaning supplies. I grabbed a different scanner, a newer model we kept as a backup. Surely this one would be fine. I scanned a bottle of bleach. Beep, $2.50. I breathed a sigh of relief. It was just a glitch in the old scanner. I scanned another item, a box of trash bags. The screen displayed the price, and then the speaker crackled. It was a different voice this time, a woman's synthesized voice, but it was filled with the same digital dread. "He's here," it whispered. I dropped the scanner and backed away. It wasn't just one scanner. It was the system. The very network of the store was somehow infected. The whispers from the scanners became a nightly torment. They never spoke unless I was scanning something. It was as if the act of scanning, of sending a signal to the central server, was opening a channel, allowing them to speak. The voices were varied, men, women, even children, all speaking in that same, dead, electronic tone. They spoke of fear, of being trapped, of a man they called the Watcher. "The Watcher sees all," a scanner whispered one night. as I scanned a bag of dog food. He puts us on the shelves. "We are the inventory," another whispered from a bottle of soda. I started to piece together a terrifying, nonsensical narrative. The voices were spirits of people, trapped somehow within the store's digital inventory system. They were the items, and someone, the Watcher, was their stalker. I became obsessed with finding the source. I went into the store's server room, a tiny, hot closet in the back. It was a mess of wires and blinking lights. I found the main inventory server, an old, humming tower. On the side of the server, someone had scratched a strange symbol, a circle with a stylized eye in the center. The next day, I noticed the same symbol tattooed on the wrist of a new employee, a quiet, strange man who had been hired to work in the warehouse. His name was Thomas, and he had a habit of just staring. He would stand for long periods, watching the customers, watching the employees, his eyes blank and emotionless. He was the Watcher. I realized the horrifying truth. Thomas wasn't just a warehouse worker. He was some kind of modern-day warlock, a techno-necromancer. He was somehow trapping people's spirits, their souls, and binding them to the barcodes of the items in the store. The store wasn't just a store. It was his personal purgatory, his collection, and the price scanners were the only way the trapped souls could cry for help. The final confrontation happened during my shift. I saw Thomas walking towards a young woman who was shopping in the food aisle, the aisle where it had all started. He was holding a small black device, something that looked like a modified barcode scanner. He was pointing it at her, a low hum emanating from the device. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to scan her, to add her to his collection. I grabbed the nearest price scanner from its cradle. I ran to the aisle and stood between Thomas and the woman. "Get out of here!" I yelled at her. She looked at me, confused and frightened, then ran. Thomas turned his blank, emotionless eyes to me. He smiled a cold, then smile. "Bad inventory," he said, his voice flat and dead. "You need to be deleted." He raised his device towards me. I aimed my own price scanner at him, my hand shaking, and squeezed the trigger. I didn't know what else to do. The scanner beeped, the loudest, most piercing beep I had ever heard. The screen, instead of a price, flashed a single word: delete. The speaker crackled, and 100 electronic voices, all the souls trapped in the inventory, screamed at once. Thomas screamed too, a high, unearthly shriek. The symbol on his wrist glowed with a blinding light. He began to flicker, to digitize, his form breaking apart into a million pixels of light. And then, with a final, deafening crackle of static, he was gone. The store's power surged, and then all the lights went out. When they came back on a moment later, everything was quiet. I picked up the price scanner. I aimed it at a can of soup. It just beeped. A normal, cheerful, beautifully mundane beep. The voices were gone. They were free. I don't know where Thomas went. Deleted? Trapped in his own system? I don't care. I quit the next day. I can't even walk into a store with a price scanner now without feeling a chill. I know that every item has a price, but I also know that at one, forgotten Family Dollar, the price for some items was a human soul.